Hello. Welcome to the second episode in the interview series for my blog, The Cello Blog. My name is Byung-Yin Yu, and today I'm joined with an incredible guest. He has won countless competitions across the world, and he is one of the most important and greatest cellists and musicians of the world today. Please welcome Andrei Ionita. Thank you so much for joining me, Andrei.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
So, briefly before we started beginning recording the interview, we sort of talked about your performance with the CSO, the Dvorak Cello Concerto, a few weeks ago. And
Yes.
first, I'd just like to say it was absolutely incredible listening to you live. It was a great honor as I'm a big fan of you. And so I was wondering if you could share with me your specific thoughts on the concerto itself, because first of all, it's one of in my opinion, the greatest cello concerto, the cello.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, you can ask any cellist. They might have some, let's say, personal kind of emotional favorite. Like in my case, it would have been with the Shostakovich concerto that I played in the finals of Tchaikovsky, and I got to perform quite often afterwards. However, you can ask any other cellist, and they would tell you that the Dvorak cello concerto is indeed the sort of the greatest and the most. It's also most fitting work written for this particular instrument. First of all, instrumentally speaking, it fits just so wonderfully. Of course, it is virtuosic, but at the same time, just written in such a way that um, you can really take advantage of like just the most cellistic way of instrument playing and way of doing music. On top of it, I think just the melodies themselves
Mm.
are just some of the best. Are just earworms. And this sort of melodic quality, the singing quality that applies so well to the cello, much better than any other string instrument, is what I think also sets I would say the effect of the work apart. And also, I think like had he written the same kind of material on a different instrument, I'm not sure it would have had the same impact, but it does take advantage of the singing qualities of the instrument, which I think is so wonderful. On top of it, of course, you have this mixture between new world and old world because, as everybody knows, it was written, like around the same time as the Ninth Symphony, and of course, you have the themes, the American-inspired themes in the beginning, and it's very interesting to see how it gradually sort of moves actually back from the American influence and sort of back to his roots, back to like third movement that is kind of inspired rather by Slavonic dances than this American theme, country or gospel music. And there is always this sense of longing in going actually all throughout the piece, which is just like something that's like gripping and always present. Okay, we don't have to mention the orchestration because it's not necessarily a concerto; it's a sinfonia concertante for cello and orchestra, right? So this was also a masterpiece just from the orchestration point of view. Yeah. So there's just something completely organic about it that yeah makes it so enjoyable from both the player's perspective and the audience perspective.
Yeah, yeah. I really think that Dvorak had a true love for the cello. Like if you hear the concerto, it's like you can literally hear, like you said, how well it fits for the instrument, and yeah,
Mm.
I think it's very beautiful. And also for the Dvorak cello concerto itself, there was so many incredible interpretations and renditions of it. Of course, with Rostropovich, in my opinion, I think that is the the, the greatest recording of Dvorak ever.
Mm.
And of course, there is so much history behind the concerto itself because it's, like we mentioned, one of the most important in the cello repertoire. And so, when you sort of approach a piece of this historic importance and
Mm-hmm.
with so many interpretations behind you, and you're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, do you focus a lot more on your own sort of um, musical drive and what you want to express compared to
Yes.
sticking with the status quo? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so my process of listening to recordings is just involving that aspect while I'm learning a new piece. So basically, I do like to listen to recordings, honestly, just for orientation purposes. when this concerto was, I think I heard it for the first time when I was like 8. I remember I did this like original competition back in Bucharest. It's something between like the 5 music schools of Bucharest, and the prize that I got the competition was a CD with exactly the program from Chicago, Dvorak, Cello Concerto and Dvorak 8th Symphony. So I've been listening to that piece since I was a little child. But I have to say, especially recently, I honestly stopped using recordings. They're wonderful. Of course, if you're a fan of that particular person, it's wonderful to just maybe feel inspired by them, but in no case emulate. Of course, I grew up listening to like to Shafran, to Jacqueline Dupre, to Rostro, to Yo-Yo Ma, and so on. I honestly don't listen to that much cello anymore unless I have to learn something new. I would rather be interested in like listening to something like Enescu symphonies, or just like sort of broaden my horizon. Because at the end of the day, one has to learn to trust their own musical instinct and to, in a way, be able to think for themselves. Of course, everybody, when you are doing and trying to make up a phrasing, you do sort of try to think for yourself. But at the same time, even I started to notice how there were a couple of people playing for me once in a while, and I recognized almost the point of the mimic I was making in those particular videos. And I'm not sure that's the best way to approach. Of course, being inspired is one thing, but then there's this just fine line between trying to, respecting and also kind of emulating. At the same time, I'm sure even my playing might have been inspired by, let's say, Stephen Isalis or Shafran. But it's just that I haven't listened to even start. Like, I don't remember actually really listening to a very famous recording of that Dvorak. Maybe besides Jackie sometime back when I was in high school. Do you remember? Do you know that very slow recording with Celi Bidache and Jacqueline Dupre?
Yeah.
Where she like has to
yeah, like
wait for ages and like get the most of the instrument along all the long notes. Yeah. So we're really, even with such a piece like that Dvorak, it's kind of, first of all, it's so organic to me that I just kind of did it. It's also one of those pieces that I think you don't need to overthink actually by the end of the day. You have to just let your instinct speak and just let the music flow, because for example, it has tons of markings anyway, but still every cellist, and actually if you look at the way the music flows, you might be needing actually to add even more markings yourself, right? Or to discuss with the conductor, with the orchestra, because there's no one single bar there that's like in the same continuous kind of pulse or tempo as the previous one. It's all just a big stream of pulses, which is why I'd rather look at the harmonic and at the form aspect of it and the rhythmical aspect of it, even more so than the actual markings that he put, because he tried rather to help out our phrasings, with those kind of markings. But at the same time, I think there's so much more, even maybe in a couple of places, less of what we can do according to acoustics, according by the end of the day to the way you feel it, because no matter how much you can analyze, and I mean the cognitive aspect of it is one thing, but then the interpretation is still, by the end of the day, of course, you have to be informed. It has to be completely informed, and that's also extremely important, and it's kind of the base layer. But the second layer is still your own emotion, that sort of inexplicable thing that makes music so wonderful.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my That's usually my process with interpretation. By the end of the day, I do try to make up my own, and of course, you have to take care of the text. That's number one. But yeah, I did grow up listening to Chalice. I'm not doing that. That's, in the same volume anymore, just to put it this way.
I see.
Yeah.
Sort of to sort of diverge from the Dvorak Cello Concerto. I think if I were to do an interview with you, when I was sort of planning about what questions I should ask, the one thing that kept like blaring through my mind was Shostakovich Cello Concerto.
Mm.
But when I first sort of heard about you after you won the Tchaikovsky cello competition, I was like, oh, who is this guy? I was so curious because I remember there were like Alexander Buzlov, rest in peace, Alexander Ram, Pablo
Mm.
Fernandez, great, very very good cellists that year in the Tchaikovsky competition, and and it was you who won first prize, and I was very curious how you could have done it. Then I listened to your recording in the final round where you played the Shostakovich cello concerto, and instantly I knew why you. I think um like of course I'm a big fan of your music, but I think I've never been as moved as I was when I first listened to your performance of the Shostakovich cello concerto.
Mm.
And so yeah, and like the level of intensity and insanity that you just have when you play. Um like for you to play at that with that much like craziness and like confidence at the final of a Tchaikovsky competition, I was also very impressed.
Yeah.
But um, I just want to ask you, what do you think? What is there anything that you simply want to convey through your interpretation of the piece? Like, what is like your message with the Shostakovich Concerto when you perform?
Well, first of all, really thank you for your appreciation. I'm very grateful. Um, just going back actually to this, even to the second round, because my personal highlight of that competition was actually the Shosti Sonata
Mm-hmm.
during the second round, and it was one of those sort of like, huge releases of tension. I had this kind of now or never type of an approach to that performance. And I remember, like after this sort of huge release of energy in the second movement, like by the time I got to the third movement, I was already tearing up, like I was playing and crying at the same time. There's this like really sort of electric moment being created in the hall, and it was really one of those once in a lifetime experiences. Also, Shostakovich was one of the composers that I've always adored, like ever since I was a teenager, and that one of those composers that have always spoken to me. Maybe it does have to do with the fact that I do come from an Eastern European background, and of course, I was born during times of liberty already, but still, you grow up listening to all the stories from your parents' generation, from your grandparents' generation, um, just in general about dictatorships and people and the hardships people had to go through, and his music is just so personal from this point of view. It's very descriptive. On top of it, it's so intelligently written. But for example, as opposed to Prokofiev, Shostakovich is so much more direct and so much more visceral in a way, also with his music language, that it just cuts right through, makes the heart of the listener. And I just knew I felt this connection with the composer, and um, so going back to, let's say, the approach of the competition, um, because that particular experience was so tiring and so grueling, I knew it would have been the last one. So I just wanted to somehow enjoy and just give it my best. Um, yeah, and that was it. I was a student before then, and afterwards I was sort of put on the map the performance map. So, yeah, but I think also again, just like with the Dvorak, there's something needs to be organic about that kind of music, and he just like has to just like in a way flow straight from the heart. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd perfectly sort of describe your playing with the Shostakovich. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, like when I watched you play, it was just without care, just just pure passion. And I think that really. And also, you stole my question, man. My next question was, if you believe that your Eastern European heritage um,
Mm.
led to sort of um, how you played or interpreted this piece, but I guess that was already answered. So I want to ask you some
It's all
questions.
interconnected.
Yeah, yeah. So sort of go back to what you're talking about with the competition. Like, also, yeah, I believe it has been a very long time since you participated in a cello competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
But um, can you describe, just for a lot of the young listeners who are listening to this right now, sort of how you'd go about um, like preparing for competitions? Because you've had so much success already. And
Mm-hmm.
this is in terms of like repertoire, interpreting the repertoire, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one piece of advice is never play something that's completely new.
Um,
Like I would recommend, okay, of course you have because you'll have the commission piece anyway, which you have to learn from scratch. And I wouldn't, first of all, I would recommend not learning more than two new pieces out of the whole repertoire. Also, when I went to Tchaikovsky, I really showcased my best in the sense of these were the pieces that I had played
mm,
for quite some time and that I knew were just the most sort of fitting for me. Like the Shostakovich I had played since high school. The concerto I had learned since high school. Rococo was the very first. I mean, Rococo, well, of course, it was in post piece, but like Arpeggione, and I played the virtuoso piece, this scherzo by Klengo that I had done also since high school. So of course, the preparation time is extremely important, but at the same time, I rather choose and approach something um, that I know I have digested already for a long time. That's number one, which is why it's really important for young kids to just accumulate as much repertoire as possible,
mm,
as early as possible, so that when you're in your early 20s, you already had done all the Beethoven sonatas or all the Brahms sonatas or all of these. So then you have the whole range to choose from
mm.
when you see the list of the repertoire list of a competition, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was sort of the approach I went with repertoire, and otherwise, it's actually important not to overthink it because it's not the end of the world if, let's say, you miss a passage or you don't play to your full potential or it doesn't work out, right? One should really not take them as like life or death situation, because what I think is even harder is an orchestra audition
Mm,
where you have really how many dozens of people applying for just one job, and it's really about a job, right? But when you go to a competition, it's just about showcasing yourself, not necessarily being judged by the jury, but rather just mm, in a way sharing also the joy of music making to people that might not have gotten the opportunity to listen to you. I mean, I'm saying this in retrospective because that's the way I should have approached it as well. instead of instead of yes, like feeling like I was gonna have a heart attack anytime soon. Or I know people who also like felt sick and had to throw up before going on stage or after going on stage at that particular edition. Anyway, um, yeah, so it's important in a way to still try to keep normal, but of course the focus is shouldn't be put on the number of hours. Like you don't have to practice 8 hours a day. You have to practice if you have the 3 hours a day that you can practice, make them count and be super concentrated and super efficient about it.
mm.
Because also when you go to a competition, you're not going to be able to practice for 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Because you have to do rehearsals, you have to travel, you have all of this in between, and you might have just 1 hour to warm up, if even. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might not be able to practice in the hotel, and so on and so forth. So what's really important is to be able to kind of do this focused approach, and honestly, as many run-throughs as possible.
Mm.
Like, be it in front of your colleagues, be it just in some house concert or whatever kind of opportunity, it is important to have the experience of run-throughs as well.
Yeah.
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 Because at the end of the day, what these competitions should be testing is your ability to sustain a performing activity later in the future as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to hear like a 45-minute, 55-minute long recital round that you might do as well in the future, right? Which is why you kind of need to have the experience of going all the way through a 1 hour long playing, you know, as opposed to just the fragmented learning of every detail in the piece and so on and so forth, which is extremely also important. But somehow, by the time you get close to the competition, run-throughs are also important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. With that and how you mentioned sort of like the stress and anxiety of doing
Mm-hmm.
sort of performing at one of the most prestigious competitions in the world. Like with you, I found that in a lot of the like me and my mother, when we watched your rounds, we were a big striking thing was like even if you make a mistake, there was no indication that you cared or maybe even noticed. Well,
Oh,
obviously,
I see. I still cared. For sure cared.
but like
But you have to.
in the moment, you were like all I felt was just like passion and just the joy of just playing, and that's what also I was very impressed at. Like I remember this one story I read about Jacqueline Dupre with Rostropovich, where you know how she was studied with Rostropovich for a little while, and
Yeah.
and like Rostropovich, of course, he saw, of course, it was Jacqueline Dupre, and he saw the level of talent and skill that she had, so he really wanted her to participate in that year's Tchaikovsky competition, right? As his
Mm.
student, and I remember she was like so fascinated by the life that all the Russian students would have with like the stress and anxiety of preparing for this competition. And she ended up not doing it because she didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
do that. So, but it was really refreshing to see. At least maybe it was different for you yourself, but for the audience like me, like it felt like you just enjoyed the process of performing, which was really great joy to see.
I tried my best, at least from the second round on, to really, yeah,
Just
just at the end of the day, share my music with them. And also, I think the whole concept of Tchaikovsky competition is because you actually get to play more repertoire. Like they ask for a full-on like 1 hour recital round. They ask for 3 concertos. At least in my edition, we had to play the classical concerto, Tchaikovsky, and another concerto of our choice. Um, so you do get to showcase a bit more. So why not just take it like kind of a concert opportunity example? Because when you get to play a bit longer, you really are able to get into the sort of concert mode, and that's what I was kind of grateful for, because it was at the end of the day kind of similar to what I do now in real life,
mm,
which is performing like full length concerts, not the two movements, like half of a Beethoven sonata, 2 movements of Bach and Etude, and whatever else, So yeah, but I have to tell you that that pressure you feel it had nothing to do with the competitors. Of course, it was one of the highest levels of any cello competition ever. Um, and some people, of course, had sort of a bigger profile already, or were just a bit older than me at the time. But the problem that everybody felt was that we knew, I think you were aware of the coverage the competition had at that particular moment. To the Medici and the whole advertisement that they were doing, and we kind of just wanted to show our best in front of so many people.
Yeah.
And that was kind of because it felt at the same time like a debut. It didn't necessarily even feel like a competition where we were being judged by the jury. Because everybody, I think, had the feeling that we were actually playing for so much more than just the jury there.
Yeah.
And this is the way I guess people should approach a competition. You play for the public, and at the end of the day, the public, of course, people are judging even when they come to listen to any concert. Like I'm still in my phase of constantly debuting, like in Chicago, like in many other places, right? So of course, automatically going to get judged by the people, but at the same time, you should go there with the intention of just sharing passion and joy for music. Because this is at the end of the day what's the most important is and that we are communicating this sort of passion for a craft that is unfortunately maybe dying out, especially with the public of our generation.
Yeah.
So that's by the end of the day the way to keep the public in is just by not necessarily wanting to show, but just like doing it organically, that we enjoy what we do, and it's just so special, and it just touches the strings of everybody's hearts in such an indescribable way. Yeah. So yeah.
All right, to sort of diverge from talking about competition advice and competition life, just want to briefly sort of talk about sort of practicing with you right now, because of course you're not a student anymore, you're not necessarily competing anymore. Like another story I heard about a very interesting difference between Rostropovich and Daniel Shafran. I already told this story to Vladimir Pong, but there's a story about how like Rostropovich, like at a huge point in his career when he was just like performing like almost every other night, like debuting just concertos. He would well, like he would not really he would sleep apparently only like 3 hours every night, eat so much food. He would not practice for days and just like play like Prokofiev Sinfonia Cantarante. And like he was just like a madman, right? He was a god. But like compared to Daniel Shafran, who even to like the very end of his career, like he'd have like a very rigid schedule of just like wake up, practice in the morning, night rest, just like practice skills, like keep the technique up. In your point, like
yeah,
point,
I've heard he would even practice at night and call his friends. That's the stories I've heard. Like asking, like he'll wake up his friends at 1 a.m. Shafran.
Wow.
Yeah, he would just call them and ask them, "Oh, which fingering do you find better?"
Yeah, I love the difference between Daniel Shafran and Rush Probes. I think
yeah,
in my opinion Daniel Shafran is a hugely underrated cellist. Of course, like with the cellist itself, we appreciate him, but his musicality is very unique. You know?
Yes, I mean everything from also the instrument, like the instrumental side of it is completely new. But it is what fascinated me when I was growing up.
Yeah.
In a way, he does fascinate you even more than Rostropovich. I mean, if you look for just a standard kind of and really self-assured type of playing and like musically just like the right way, of course you're going to look for Rostro. If you want to look even for like, of course, for in my opinion, he had one of the best, for example, bow techniques ever, which allowed him to sustain such a long career and like still play. You see his older recordings. I mean, the mechanics might not be the same, but he was still having loads of power and energy in his playing, and that has something to do with learning this sort of very natural kind of technique that kind of allows you to sustain the long notes and
like same with his vibrato as well. Like I think like he could literally produce like every single like he could make the cello sound like almost like every different instrument, and like the pianissimo would like reach to like the very end of the hall, and of course it would make everyone cry, and then like the forte, like the opening of the Dvorak, I like every time I hear Mr. Pope play, I don't even need to know if it's him or not. I know it's him. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But to sort of go back to the question, um, so the difference in the the practicing and sort of the routines of Rostropovich and Shafran, like the polar opposites. In your
yeah.
like in your career right now, what do you think is more similar to yourself? And do you have a specific regimen right now, or are you more
No, the
careful?
irregular. You have to go for the irregular.
Mm,
There's no other way around it. You just have to find those slots where you can just like, practice. Sometimes I would have to practice on concert day something completely different that I play the next week.
mm,
Things like this happen as well if your schedule is too tight. Yeah. But what's very important is to have been very organized in your practice just when growing up. And that's the most important aspect of it. It's also, so the goal of practicing even a certain piece is not being able to hit all the notes, is being able to develop the right kind of technique to hit all the notes of any piece you would be playing, or to be able to sustain any phrase you want to do, however you want to do. So this is why, doing your scales and etudes, but just working very concentrated on like I remember working on with my teacher on even something like Rococo third variation, an hour on the first phrase, searching for the like doing basically vibrato school, learning about right hand technique, learning how like make the shifts almost not noticeable, and all of those small details that are just all interconnected, and that just create at the end of the day some very refined way of music making, not just instrument playing. So this is what I recommend to everybody to do it, to be organized about it when you're in your teens, when you're in college, because these are the times where also we have where like, the brain is just the fastest working and can accumulate really way easier and can develop good habits, right?
mm,
Because you won't get that luxury later in life. Yeah, especially I think even you just said at some point like if you are a performing artist and uh, you're not able to make it work in with 2 hours a day, then you shouldn't do it or something of that sort. Because by the time you reach that kind of a schedule, and even if even if let's say you might have a few hours off, the process of traveling, the process of like the internal kind of of course the stress of always being there for rehearsals, for like that is kind of draining your energy as well. So sometimes you might even have 3 hours, but you might not be able to get like an hour and a half out of yourself of practicing, because proper practicing requires loads of concentration and at the same time physical energy and emotional energy. So yeah, the most important thing is to do the concentrated and very well regimented practicing while one is still studying. Because when you're studying, you're still in a bubble. I was noticing even with people who were like people during Corona. In a way, of course, it was hard for students' prospects, but the fact that they were still enrolled in school, they still had. I mean, when schools opened again, the schools usually opened before concert halls, right? And like they had somewhere to go. They had some goals. They had some classes to attend. They were still sort of caught up in kind of a bubble that kept them psychologically more alive than people who just graduated and didn't know what to do afterwards with their lives
mm,
in those darker times. So I would just like to say, take advantage of that bubble area, that bubble period.
mm.
Yeah.
Um, Sort of not a little diverge to more technique stuff. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, what I noticed when I saw you play live, I was very impressed by your bow technique. I realized that
Mm.
you were able to project sound very, very well, and I was really impressed by that. Of course, your left hand technique. Oh, well, obviously your technique is going to be fantastic. Like you're one of the leading young cellists, so there's no doubt that it's incredible. But Personally speaking, are there any aspects of your technique that you want to work on or improve?
Oh, I think every cellist wants to work on projection further and further and further. I think wasn't this like one of Rostropovich's obsession as well, and everybody's obsession. Everybody's trying to improvise with I don't know, finding these resonant end beams and whatever
Yeah,
setups for the instruments and all. It's unfortunately a problem with us with cellists and with also with the Dvorak cello concerto.
yeah,
But I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily working on something new, but I would have to say that bow technique is a continuous process. Just being to sustain like even that 1 inch further or that one like have one like string of hair for extra, being used on the string. It's honestly a continuous process. This is something that so my very first teacher, um, he was very nice, but he wasn't necessarily helpful. So 4 years later, when I was in my seventh grade, I was 12, around 12, 13, I switched to my other teacher. And she sort of corrected all the kind of technical issues sort of on the go. And she made me aware of proper bow technique, of refined bow technique. For me, the way she did it was she started actually just with string crossings.
mm,
Because when you're able to do, just to concentrate, for example, to have like very how should I put it? Like very low angle when doing the string crossings. So that you're kind of always moving on the same plane. You're gonna have to do the physical aspect of the like with the fingers on the bow in order to ensure that. You're only gonna be able to make some sense of sostenibility. And of course all the all the scales with the very long notes and all of these types of things. But it was indeed a continuous process that lasted. I think even after after Tchaikovsky, also with concert experience, it sort of evolved or developed in a way. It's also first of all when you play regularly, if you also realize on stage how deep how susceptible instruments are to weather.
mm,
So maybe, yeah, the G string might not speak at all today. You just have to adjust like on the go and also develop this sort of sense of doubling yourself in the sense of being able to listen to yourself objectively.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Thanks for that. Nice. All right, actually, sort of one last question. It's not really relating to practicing necessarily, but I noticed, I think like maybe last year or something, where I heard on Instagram you playing a piano concerto by Mozart. I was like, what?
Mm,
Like, and of course, it was very impressive. Like as a cellist to play that level of piano with orchestra.
right.
But how do you think that the impact of your piano playing had on your overall music, if there was an impact? Like, did you?
Because piano was my first instrument. That's how I
Mm,
started, and then I switched 3 years later to cello. Well, I would say that I'm still a frustrated pianist at heart, but um, no, it was very helpful because piano automatically develops your harmonic training, like
mm,
harmonic hearing all the time. So I did not have necessarily problems switching to a monodic instrument from this point of view. And I would say, for me, it was always nice because I could always sort of look at the parts of any sonata I was doing. So
mm.
it's one thing to look at it just visually, and it's a completely different thing to actually hear it while you play those particular chords and harmonies and the sheer size. So the reason why I wanted to go back to piano playing was really not to show off. It was just the fact that I had time to do it. I was completely free. So it was really a pandemic project, and just before a couple of months before, I had actually rented an upright piano at my place.
Yeah.
It was like perfect timing, right? And honestly, I just wanted to expand my repertoire. and just find new means of musical expression. Because with the piano you just have this sort of endless list of the best music there is. So I just wanted to discover it. I had this obsession for the Mozart A major concerto, and I always wanted to be able to perform it. So yeah, I kind of started to put in the effort. And also talking about it, it's in a way different, but at the same time not as different, because for both instruments, for all the instruments, you need your shoulders down and to use your natural weight. And for example, playing the scale on the piano with your right hand should have the feeling of a bow stroke, just like a natural bow stroke, like from the forearm point of view, for example.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of sort of lapping over between the instruments, because the most important thing is to just be natural. And and also, but it's of course it's because of the percussive aspect of it is different to, like, the way you want to search for colors with an instrument that indeed does not actually offer the same range as ours.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, you just had to adjust your hearing in a different sense, and that was kind of fascinating. Yeah, and I also like to challenge myself, to just find new means and just like take on a project that I knew would excite me and make me feel like a small kid again.
Yeah, totally with you with the like the interest that you have in the piano repertoire. I feel like as like a cellist, and I think every cellist biggest sort of sadness is, well, of course, there's no Mozart cello concerto. There's no, like, the cello repertoire is like so much smaller than a piano and violin. But
I mean, talking about the big classics, yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But
indeed.
But yeah, it was really interesting to watch you play the Mozart piano concerto. It was very nice. And all right, to finally diverge to sort of the end, I just want to ask you some more, not necessarily about like the very nitty gritty bits and pieces of music, but more about general, maybe philosophical life questions to sort of wrap.
Yes.
So first, I'm just curious, what is the most difficult piece that you've ever encountered in terms of both technique and musicality? It could be different.
Well, it was too. I at the time when I did the RT competition, that particular commission piece was sort of unplayable. Like everybody, you ask anybody who took part in the competition, like, this is the hardest commission piece we ever had to do, and it was quite long. It's like 6-7 movements, and I wanted to learn it by heart, and that was also a process. But well, Shostakovich is very hard, but it also has that organic feel to it, like that word. I would say Prokofiev, Sinfonia Concertante, is way more uncomfortable, musically speaking, as well. It's like, of course, you need to be able to feel instrumentally comfortable with it, and I needed a couple of good like performances on stage with an orchestra to even start to feel a bit more comfortable, just purely technically speaking, because it's just so long and tiring.
Yeah,
it's like the second movement it could be a concerto in itself, and then you still have the third movement left.
Yeah.
Right. But also musically speaking, it's way more way less organic. It's more like scenes as opposed to a like big narrative. I mean, there is a narrative thread, I guess, but it's more like scene oriented, and somehow it's not the easiest to still create some kind of a big bow there. And also, like, the coda is majestic and is bombastic, but it just almost comes out of the blue, so you need to already prepare it early in advance, in some sense of way, with some kind of accumulation of tension. And yeah, I think that's one of the really hard pieces for us.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's also that kind of, it's not only that kind of modern where you there are still a lot of like phrases and romantic influences on top of modern passages and on top of like the most virtuosic things and hard things with like double stops up there that you'll have to do, right? And just managing to put it all together as just requires time, you know?
Yeah.
Like you can ask me to replace somebody last minute with any concerto. For that one, I would tell you I need 3 days before.
Oh,
And that's kind of a, yeah, yeah. I mean, anything else if you ask me to do, I can do on the day.
oh,
Prokofiev, I would tell you I need a couple of days just for my brain,
yeah,
insanity, for my sanity,
yeah.
for my comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. It's of course, and the ending too, to keep that kind of like the energy to,
Yes.
yeah, to like go all the way to the
But
end.
then it's frustrating because the ending doesn't only belong to you. So probably that's also why they feel, I always feel like there's something missing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Also, I'd like to ask you, even though before I ask you about like your practice routine, I just want to ask, like, what is your daily routine on tour and off tour? Just like, what do you do?
We just have to follow the schedule because it just gets kind of full. I do try whenever when I'm in a new place that I want to discover to try it at least and get some hours of walking around, just
Mm.
getting the fresh air, just I don't know, going to some art galleries, which are also in a way a nice source of inspiration. Um, yeah, and when I get back home to Berlin, I just have to do laundry. So yeah,
What
and
do you?
finally get to do some cooking for myself.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Okay, this is a more philosophical question, but what do you think is the benefit of classical music in our society today, if there is a benefit?
oh yeah, I mean it might sound cheesy, but I really believe that first of all, music, and especially classical music, is just food for soul.
Mm.
There's no other, there's no better way to describe it. It's just nourishment for our sort of mental health and just for the soul, because I believe that music has the ability to to describe human emotions in the most sort of direct visceral way, um even way more than just looking at a genius painting. Just
Mhm.
listening, the temporal aspect of a performance is just something that, because it's always changing, right? You have how many notes per second or how many, right? And I think this aspect, this moving aspect of it, the temporal aspect of it, is what makes music so impressive, because it's always changing. Um, from this point of view, I think music just is the one art that manages to touch people's hearts in the most direct and the most intense way, which is why I do feel like I'm happy to do what I do. So in that sense, yes, music as classical music especially is so. There's two aspects of, there's also the heritage aspect of classical music, even though
Mm.
I don't want to get too much into it, because like when you want to perform for let's say for new public, you wouldn't necessarily want to convince them that it's, we play this because we want to preserve the past. We play this because we want to, like share them the joy of music, making no matter what century that music was written on, or no matter what century we are performing it. But still, it is just this sort of footprint of human civilization,
Mm.
and we must preserve this, of course. Just in the same way that the paintings are preserved in a museum, we should preserve classical music as well, and all of these masterpieces that these people wrote, and we have to preserve them by performing them. We cannot
Yeah.
right, hang the score in a museum. Um, and what's fascinating to me is that no matter what, like through the centuries, I think music has been able to convey the same sets of emotion. Like people were, it's just a journey through people's emotions from the past, which were by the end of the day not necessarily different than ours. They all had moments of joy, disappointments, and happiness in relationship, without relationship, breakups, and more of the philosophical, transcendental questions about life and the world that we are still asking ourselves. So I think music is just the best way to communicate that, and I think it's also our job as performing artists to do that, and also to sort of enjoy the process, because it's also like music making those ways to self-discovery and to unlocking all kinds of ranges and colors of emotions.
Yeah,
That in a way, other people that work in different fields might not have the direct access to.
exactly.
But then we can also, we can access them ourselves and then bring them to the public. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And yeah, before you mentioned a lot about your inspirations that came from Dana Chopin and Jacqueline.
From? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I just like to ask you, like, who are your specific musical cellistic heroes, and like, what aspect of them do you admire the most, and what aspect would you like to emulate in your career that wasn't theirs?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So of course, Shafran, he's just one of a kind, and like that's just his originality, and I think he was also kind of being unapologetic with whatever he was doing,
Yeah,
musically speaking, instrumentally speaking, and this aspect of it was just absolutely fascinating. Jacqueline, also I think similar, just with her approach towards music making, just like this 100% honesty, and just of course this huge like musical power and energy through everything that she was doing. She was like giving and giving towards us, and this is just wonderful. You think about mm, you think about like Stephen Easterlis, who is probably one of my favorite living cellists, and just his completely natural and relaxed way of playing. I think he's the most relaxed instrumentalist you'll
yeah,
ever see, but also his incredibly thoughtful. I got to play for him a couple of times. He, he was one of the most thoughtful musicians I ever met, and also that what I appreciate actually by the end of the day about all of these people, I think, is that they were just true to themselves, and they had this aspect of sincerity. They just the purity of soul sort of emulates through and cuts through, no matter how great of virtuosos they are, and so on and so forth. That's also amazing, and that's also something I truly appreciated. And yeah, but this kind of aspect of transcending the instrument already
mm,
is what interests me, and is also something that I strive for, because by the end of the day, yes, I am a cellist, and I know I'm good at playing cello, and I know that I was very fortunate to actually like be able to play this instrument, and I feel like I do match with the instrument. At the same time, I want to be remembered rather as a musician
mm.
as opposed to a cellist. I
Oh,
want to remember like as an artist, just like because when you have for example, these iconic pianists, you had the feeling that they transcend the instrument.
yeah,
I don't know if psychologically speaking, the cello world is at that level yet.
mm,
They're still, I don't know, maybe amazed at how this person projects, or how this person has this technique, or like how Rostro would hit all the octaves in these passages and so on and so forth, and how did he do it. I think the next step is really to go almost beyond that, and just like also from I mean the perspective of us as cellists and as of the audience, is to be amazed at what great of musicians we also are,
mm,
and just sort of get out of the psychological um, limitations that we put ourselves into. So just like to when you have the audience at the palm of your hands for those like couple of very special seconds, that's my actual goal
Mm.
in a performance, no matter what instrument I play.
Yeah.
Mm. So yeah, I think this would be something. This, in my opinion, something that I think those cellists that we so revere were able to do.
Mm.
Just of course, be like have very unique or very just amazing, also technical abilities and that kind of refined technique that allows them to make music. But they were already kind of growing out of it towards something even, yeah, just something more, yeah, almost transcendental. And I think that's something that I also strive to do, sort of already transcend just the fact that I'm doing music on this particular instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic answer. And technically, that was my first sort of serious question, but I have one last sort of silly
Yes.
question just for myself.
Yeah.
If suddenly you were placed in a situation by like some divine being or something that you just had to have one last day to perform, just to perform anything. Like let's split it up into like a concerto, like a sonata, and just like a solo piece. Like what concerto would you play? What sonata would you play? And what like just solo piece would you play to sort of leave as your final thing to the world?
Okay, so well, Shosti, and I really love Bach 5 out of all the suites. That's my favorite.
The Fifth Suite?
Don't you
That's
think my favorite, especially for the saraband.
Don't you think it's a little depressing to have
No, but it's just great. It's just great. I don't know. I love it. I love the saraband. For me, the saraband is one of the best things he ever wrote. So
yeah, the saraband is so unique, like compared to any other movie. I think it is the most unique, and there's like a feeling of like you're just floating, and there's no like How about for sonata?
And it feels organic. I don't know. It feels way more organic than the sixth or the fourth. So yeah, I think that's my favorite Bach, and like probably cello solo work.
Yeah. How about for like sonata? Like what?
No, Shostakovich and Shostakovich concerto.
Oh, okay.
I think so. Yeah, just so many memories.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, once again, it was very fun to have you, and it was truly
thank you.
An honor to be able to speak to one of my personal heroes, that being yourself.
Thank you as well. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. All right.